The Edmonton Oilers are climbing their way up the standings, one overtime point at a time. How much further away are they from where they need to be?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, match with Indeed. So on today's show, we are going to continue our theme. Whenever we have a game recap episode, we are going to build off of the game itself and use it to analyze the Oilers season at large, to kind of try and build out further and weave a more coherent narrative. Because game by game, it's hard to identify a pattern. But if you extrapolate outward and you make a conscious effort to think about the bigger picture, you can start to contextualize some of these individual games within that bigger picture. So in our first segment, we're going to talk about the power play. We're going to talk about why they were able to so effectively get that 6-on-5 goal. And I know power play 6-on-5, people get a little hairy when I make that 1-to-1, but same general principle applies, using that extra man to your advantage. We'll talk about how the Oilers can improve, because frankly, their power play is not where it needs to be. Our second segment, we are going to tackle Stuart Skinner and the goaltending situation, because that has definitely bubbled up as a point of conversation in various corners of the internet. And on our third and final segment, we're going to talk about continuing to go to overtime, and the Leafs are a good team, and we'll talk about that in the third segment. But to start, and this is going to be the most obvious thing I have said in my time as host of Locked On Oilers, the point of a power play is a numbers advantage. The other team has one less player. So the difficulty for the defending team is that they have 4 players to defend the space you would typically defend with 5. We understand that when a power play is struggling or inefficient, typically speaking, there's a lack of movement. And there are 2 types of movement on a power play. We can be talking about skater movement and puck movement. As you hear me say all of the time here on Locked On Oilers, there's 2 ways to get the puck where you want it to go. You can skate it there yourself, or you can pass it. Power plays typically struggle when they are only moving the puck. If all 5 of your skaters are relatively stationary and not creating conflict for the defense doesn't have to do a whole lot. The defense can maintain structure. It can take away passing lanes. It can take away shooting lanes. And what I liked so much about the Draisaitl 6-on-5 goal, and again, I know that is not a traditional power play situation, but it speaks to what the Oilers need to get to in their conventional 5-on-4 situation. So the Oilers are unique in that they have 3 truly great options to facilitate their power play. Most teams, they have 2 choices. Most teams, they either have the trigger man on one of the circles for the one-timer, or they have a good net front guy. You know, you think about some of the other great power plays across the league. You think about Tampa Bay with Nikita Kucherov running the half wall as a distributor. They had Stamkos on the other circle for the longest time, looking for the one-timer. They've since evolved that. You think about the Rangers, where they have Mika Zibanejad at the top of the one circle. They have Chris Kreider at the net front, and they have Adam Fox, which is kind of similar to what the Oilers have to a little degree, considering Bouchard and Fox, similar toolboxes, good shooters of the puck. But what makes the Oilers so effective is the fact that McDavid, as the facilitator, can execute it from anywhere. We did an episode way back in September during the preseason where I broke out my dry erase board and I diagrammed all of the different ways the Oilers can beat you. So our best play on the power play for the Oilers, and ultimately what ends up happening on the 6-on-5 Draisaitl goal, is the Draisaitl one-timer from the bottom of the right circle. It is an extremely sharp angle. It is hard for the goalie to get to that corner of the post and protect the top side near post. That's the baseline, because typically that puck is coming from behind the net because McDavid has skated it down low or won the puck down low. It's coming from across the other circle where McDavid has skated around the net, or Nuge has funneled it across to Draisaitl. That's option 1. Option number 2, You have the Hyman backdoor play, the play that got him maligned as he went on his way to a 54 goal season last year. You think about how many of those happens last year the Oilers were able to convert because the volume of opportunities. And I do think there is something to the Oilers' power play issues. I think the fact that they are so cold. This is a team with some of the best players in the world, and they're sitting at 22nd in the entire NHL at 17.4%. I think the fact, and the numbers bear this out. I want to click over to my notes here and make sure I have the right numbers in front of me. But yeah, on the power play this year, and that's 5-on-4, 4-on-3. It does not include 6-on-5 because that's not a power play situation. But again, we're using that as an illustration for the principles of a good power play. The Oilers' leading chances on the power play. McDavid has 27, Draisaitl has 27, Bouchard has 26, Nugent-Hopkins has 18, and then Zach Hyman has 15. Zach Hyman is a volume shooter, and I don't use that with a negative connotation. I say that in terms of, for Hyman to be effective, he needs to shoot the puck a lot because he's not, an Ovechkin type shooter. He's not David Pastrnak type shooter. He's an above average NHL shooter, but you wouldn't categorize him as an elite shooter. And that means he needs volume. And for him to have fewer shots on goal than Ryan Nugent, scoring chances, not shots on goal than Nugent-Hopkins, that tells me that something is off here with the power play. And it is. The Oilers' power play has consistently been amongst the top 10 in the entire NHL. And that's fundamentally baked in to the Oilers' recipe. The Oilers are predicated on dominating the McDavid minutes in all situations. He doesn't kill penalties, so that means we need to destroy at 5-on-4, and in our McDavid even strength minutes, we need to outright dominate. And right now, the power play is not dominating. You were able to get one on Saturday night, and you were able to get the 6-on-5 one, which is good. But as you look at these numbers, as you look at the chances, what jumps out to me is, and this is not an Oilers unique phenomena, it's harder than ever to get a shot on goal in today's NHL. When you look at the disparity between scoring chances and shots on goal, that gap is bigger than it's been in a long time. And the defense is better. You can say, oh, so much about the shooting talent, but the defense is better too. You've got more mobile skaters. You've got guys who are able to get in shooting lanes and clamp things down. And I understand the Oilers are in a weird spot right now, especially as far as the power play, because the chances are there. They just can't seem to get them going. Draisaitl tied for the league lead in goals. Almost all of them are even strength. I believe it's 14 of his 17 goals are at 5-on-5. And at a certain point, you need to reassess. We saw the Oilers toy with Matthias Ekholm there on the power play at various points earlier in the season when McDavid was injured. I don't think that's the recipe. I think for me, getting the Oilers power play where it needs to go is predicated on getting McDavid more puck touches. And that is that's one of the measures I keep internally for how a game is going for the Oilers, is how many times does McDavid touch the puck? Because there are times where it seems like he's on the ice every shift and he's constantly engaged. He's constantly on the puck. And then there are games where he goes a little while without touching the puck. And especially on the power play, where you want to use his skating. And the last thing I want to get to, and I call it the phone booth power play, 5-on-4 is good. But when you get that puck in tight, in between the circles down to the net mouth, and you can make it a 4-on-3, it's even harder to defend for those three defenders because you get them in a reactionary period where it can go to Draisaitl for the shot, it can go to Hyman for the shot. McDavid can do the jitterbug to the net where he can try and beat everyone in front of him and drive to the net. And then you have the secondary opportunities, which is ultimately what ended up happening on the Draisaitl goal in the pulled goalie situation on Saturday night, where his initial shot got saved. He was able to crash down. Hyman was already down low. And you created that phone booth rugby scrum. And Draisaitl is a very physical hockey player. He doesn't have the profile of a Tom Wilson, but he doesn't mind getting in those scrums and he doesn't mind playing with his body. So that was encouraging to see. We're going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the goaltending situation in the context of the Toronto game and the season at large. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. If you went over to the PrizePicks website or open the app, you could do whether or not Joe Mixon is going to have more than 89.5 yards, if CJ Stroud is going to throw for more than 239.5 passing yards, or if Nico Collins is going to have more than 72.5 receiving yards. So, download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Remember, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL so they know we sent you, and get $50 instantly after your first lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is listening to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are unpacking the week that was in Edmonton. And you go to overtime, 3 straight games. You feel like you're playing reasonably well, but something just isn't clicking for you. Something's not right. And that sounds very rudimentary. That sounds very reactionary. The idea that, well, they keep finding ways to lose games, but on an innate level, you feel that too. You know, there's been so many times this year where they have a 1-goal lead late or they're trailing by 1 late, and you feel that the impending doom is coming. And it's very different from the Oilers team of last year that once it got out of its early season funk, really kind of felt as dynamic as could be, that it was in every single game. And the season is still young. I do want to reiterate that. As I've covered ad nauseum here on Locked On Oilers, they went through a lot of turnover. They turned over 3 defenseman spots in the 6 defensemen they started last year. They turned over 3 forward spots. You know, they sunk more money from their defense into their forwards. They made a conscious decision to spend $10 million on Adam Henrique, Jeff Skinner, and Victor Arvidsson, dumping Cody Ceci, losing Philip Broberg. You know, you lose that money that you spent on those guys, and it creates, for lack of a better word, it creates an austerity moment where you have to pick, what are we going to spend our money on? And the Oilers made the conscious decision to put more money into their forward group because they felt that if they overwhelmed their opponents, their defensive woes would be minimized. You know, they feel that we have the best first pair in the entire NHL, so we'll figure out the rest as we go. You know, we trust Darnell Nurse to bounce back. You know, Nurse is supposedly okay. I remember reading reports Saturday night that he was in good spirits, that he was okay in the locker room after the game. Probably not going to be able to go their next game because Joshua Brown was called up from Bakersfield as insurance in case Nurse couldn't go. But if you're looking at a back 6 of Ekholm, Bouchard, Joshua Brown, Ty Emberson, Brett Kulak, Travis Dermott, and Troy Stetcher, you know, you got to recalibrate your expectations. And I started this segment talking about the defense, even though it's supposed to be about Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard, because those two things are fundamentally tied together. We did an episode last week trying to assess who's more culpable in the Oilers' early season struggle, and I don't think you can put more blame on one party than the other. I think the defense at large has been pretty mediocre. I think they've really struggled to move the puck at times and gotten hemmed in their own zone. I think the fact that they are still auditioning a rotating cast of 3 defensemen to figure out who the best 2 are, you know, it goes back to that old Bill Parcells expression, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. Well, if you have 3 guys for 2 spots, you don't have 3 guys, because if you felt good enough about those 2 of those 3 guys, they would be locked in. You wouldn't be doing this revolving door. But right now, it's hard not to feel like the goaltending is part of the problem. And I know I just said that, but that's the type of game. You only give up 22 shots on goal. You got to get something. And I understand that the Leafs are a good team. I know, as much as everybody wants to make fun of them, the lack of playoff success, the Leafs are a really good regular season team. They have some of the best players in the world. And if you give them opportunities, they're going to convert them. You know, when you give players like Mitch Marner that much space because it's 3-on-3 overtime, he's going to convert them. Mitch Marner, as much as he is maligned, as much as he is mocked, he is one of the 10, 15 best players in the entire world. I have no reservations about that opinion. I have long thought he's an incredible player. And I think team success getting lopped onto a player's reputation misses the boat in some regards. And for Marner, I do think that's the case. But enough of me on my soapbox for Mitch Marner. The Oilers need something to break their way. And I think you have a better chance of getting your goaltending to break right as opposed to your defense, because I think we've seen this historically. And at least in Stuart Skinner's case, it's the truth. This is a player who gets better the more they play. When you look at his splits month by month for his career, he gets better as the season goes along. His best statistical months are January and April. October has been his worst month as an NHLer. November, his stats are not great. But as the season goes along, he has typically gotten better. You think about last year, they come out of the gate really slow. Jack Campbell struggles, Skinner struggles, and they change coaches and they get into a nice little rhythm. And I am still a proponent that you want to get your goalie in as good a rhythm as possible. I think for someone like Skinner, who I don't want to call fragile because that feels unfair, but for somebody who's streaky, let's say, I think you want to get him in as many games as possible in a nice rhythm. And it's one of the real drawbacks of the way the NHL schedule is structured in the early season, when they're only playing 3 days a week and it's, Tuesday, Friday, Sunday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and he's only getting one of those three. He's getting 2 of those 3 starts. It's hard to get in a routine. And I do think the lack of consistency in the schedule is playing into the Oilers' lack of consistency with so much layoff time, with so few back-to-backs, with so few every other day. It's hard to build up a routine. But right now, it's hard to say Skinner's not part of the problem. And I think Skinner is a good enough goalie that we don't need to deliberate too much time over this. But I do want to point this out. The Oilers did not invest a lot of money in their defense or their goaltending this offseason. They are paying Skinner and Pickard combined. I think it's the 28th highest cap hit of goaltenders. Where is it? Right here. It's 29th in goaltender salary when you add Skinner and Pickard together. The Oilers did not commit a lot of money to a goalie. When you are not at the top of the pecking order, when you don't have Shesterkin or Sorokin or I know Saros is struggling right now, but historically he's been very good. A Hellebuck. When you don't have that bell cow goaltender who can start the bulk of your games, you get what you pay for. And that position in particular is uniquely volatile in relation to the environment. You're not the most defensively sound team, and you put a slightly above average goalie behind that defense, and you shouldn't be necessarily surprised if he struggles at points. And Skinner's gonna start playing better. He's not this bad. He's played at a pretty high level at various points, coming out of last season, coming out of the Cup final. There is real conjecture that he might start for Canada at the Four Nations face-off next January. But right now, he's at the bottom at a lot of these statistical categories. He's sitting here at 5-5-2 with a 3.28 goals against average and an 8.77 save. He's 68th of 70 goalies in goals saved above expected. For his career in October, he's a 5.7-2 goalie, 8.95 save percentage, a 3.02 goals against. In November, it's 16-13-1, 8.97, 3.05. December, 14-8, 14-8-1, 9.15 save, 2.58 goals against average. So it's okay. And you're allowed to be frustrated that Stuart Skinner is not making the one save you need him to make. But understand that the Oilers made the roster this way, that they are putting probably more responsibility on Stuart Skinner's plate than he can handle, because they felt that this was the most optimal roster construction for the talent they had. And because they're not scoring enough, because the defense isn't great, because they are playing so much defense, because they struggle to transition from defense to offense when McDavid's not out there, it puts more pressure on Stuart Skinner. And it feels like any goal can be the backbreaker. But we are going to take one more break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we're going to tie a bow on the Leafs game and put the early season inconsistency in its proper context coming up right after this. We are all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree. Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. The thing I like most about Indeed is that it is constantly evolving. It leverages over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked-on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers as we try and stave off a vitally, vitally dangerous case of the Mondays, because I know I am tired and unfortunately it's Monday, but we do get to do Locked On Oilers every day, which is nice. We get to watch hockey. We get to watch football. We will be okay. I'm trying to think about how I want to say this, but I feel that the strongest argument in favor of the Oilers right now is, and I mean in terms of their long-term prospects as being a serious Stanley Cup contender this year in spite of the slow start, is the simple fact that the rest of the field, the rest of the candidates, are not that scary. You know, if you go look at the NHL standings right now, if you were to click over and look at them in the Western Conference, the Jets are the first place team in the entire NHL. They are first in the West. The Jets, for as good as they are out of the gate, you know, best start ever through 15 games. They've got really good underlying numbers. They've got great goaltending. The Jets don't scare me. The Minnesota Wild do not scare me. The Dallas Stars, they scare me a little bit, but the Oilers have proven the ability to beat them. The Vegas Golden Knights are ahead of them. Vegas, I am not as nearly worried about this version of Vegas as I would have a permutation a year or two ago. We know the Oilers can beat the Kings. The Canucks are mired in another funky season. The Oilers will pass the Calgary Flames at some point in the next few weeks as the Flames cool off from their really hot start. Maybe you want to pay some mind to the Avalanche, who are 2 points back of the Oilers, but the Avalanche have their own issues as well. That's the argument right now. It is not so much an endorsement of the Oilers as much as it is an indictment of the league at large. And you see it. The Oilers can limp to overtime and compile loser points just as easily as the Islanders did last year, as much as the Maple Leafs did last year. And if you can get to overtime and you can salvage 1 point from your losses, you're going to be reasonably well positioned. The Oilers are not playing great hockey right now, and I don't think anyone would try and tell you they are, but they're not even scratching the surface of what their capability is. The relation of underlying to actual numbers, there's a significant gap. And the Oilers are playing better. You know, they're 6-4-1 in their last 10, if I remember. Yeah, 6-3-1 in their last 10, excuse me. 6-4-1 is 11, not 10, excuse me, because they lost the last game before that. 6-3-1 in their last 10. They are getting closer to even on a lot of the underlyings, a lot of the actual goal splits. But right now, as we have long established on this season of Locked On Oilers, the Oilers need to start scoring more. Until the Oilers can get their offense going, the rest of the team is going to be holding them back. They have spent a lot of money on their forward group. I understand they have spent a lot of money on Darnell Nurse. That is a sunk cost at this point. You are not getting out of that contract. There is no way to move him. He had a nice game last week in the game where McDavid broke 1,000 points. He had the 2 goals. All of that is great. The Oilers have spent a significant amount of resources on their forward group. They still have Evander Kane, who may or may not come back in February or March. The Oilers are in a position where all of their issues are compounding into each other, and it's creating this environment where it feels like there's a black cloud lingering over their head. the simple fact that they are struggling to score 3 goals a game, which is not a tall ask. I do want to reiterate, it is not a tall ask to expect the Oilers to score 3 goals a game. That's not crazy. You shouldn't need an overtime period to get to 3 goals a game. Through 18 games, the Oilers are averaging 2.78 goals per game. They have 5 goals fewer, 50, than the league average, 55, through the number of games they've played. They are not scoring enough. So for all of the defensive woes, for the segment we spent talking about Skinner, the second segment, until they get scoring, and that especially includes the power play, because look, you want to talk about the 5-on-5 issues, the interconnectivity of the defense, the non-Bouchard-Ekholm minutes, that's fine. I agree with you. They need to play better. But the Oilers are constructed where their power play needs to be giving them a goal pretty much every game. They need at least one power play goal every game. And I know that's not how the math ultimately shakes out, but that's what it averages out to almost. I know they're not going to have 100 power play goals on the season as a team, but you're going to need a good chunk of power play goals to be as competitive as you want to be. You think about where the Oilers were at last year as a team, where they had one of the best power plays in the entire league. They had 64 power play goals last year. I just pulled it up because I was curious. You get a power play goal about 2/3 of your games. 64 out of 82 is about 2/3, because you would do 24, 24, and then 24. That would get you 78. But you get what I'm saying here. The Oilers need their power play to get going, because that is the one area of their game and the one component where you don't get to use the defense excuse. You don't get to use the lack of depth excuse. You have the best player in the world. You have a top 10 forward in the world in Draisaitl. You have a top 10 defenseman in the world in Bouchard. Hyman had 50 goals last year. Nuge had 100 points 2 years ago. This is the best power play in the league on paper. It is sitting in 22nd. Get back to your game. Get the other team into a phone booth between the circles and the crease and force them to actively play defense. Don't settle for the Bouchard point shot. Don't look for the redirect. Get down low, bully your way to the net, use Hyman and Draisaitl, force the other team to play defense, and let McDavid skate. Let him use his jitterbug. Let him use his hands. Create more offense. This power play is not good enough right now to make up for the Oilers' other issues. The talent is there. The opportunities are there. But until they get scoring consistently at 5-on-4 at the rate they have in the past, it's not going to be good enough. I said 64 goals last year in the 82-game regular season. They have 8 right now. They have 8 through 18 games. I know it's about a fourth. You would do 18 and 18, 36, 36. You get close to what you had last year, but you got to go do it. They had 68 last year, 18 through 18. I know that's not directly 1/4 of 82, but estimating that would get you to about 72. So on pace for the same number of goals, but the conversion rate is significantly lower. And that's the issue here. The Oilers aren't creating enough power play opportunities. They're not drawing enough penalties. And then when they get to the power play, they're not doing enough. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. Before we get out of here, thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey, become a fantasy hockey expert, and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I will be back tonight after the Oilers game against the Canadiens. We'll have our episode out as soon as the game is over. I will talk to you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.